Islam. Islam 101.
Bismillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillahi amma ba'd. Welcome to a new episode of Islam 101, a program in which we're trying to bring to you, our respected viewers, a clear and concise understanding of the basics of the religion of Islam. And today, we're going to deal with one of the most important issues in the religion of Islam, because it is an issue that helps us to understand from where and how does the Muslim come about understanding the legislation of the religion of Islam. So we're going to deal with what is known as the masadir of at-tashri', or the sources of legislation in the religion. How do the Muslims come to take a particular issue and understand a particular issue as being permissible or impermissible? For an example, intoxicants, they are not permissible to be consumed by a Muslim. How do we come to that understanding? By which sources? Is it left up to the understanding and the opinion of any and every particular person? He wants to make permissible what is in agreement with his culture or his desires. He wants to make impermissible what doesn't go along with his culture or his desires. So this is what the topic is concerning today. In some of the previous episodes, we've emphasized the importance of the Quran and the Sunnah. The Quran, the Book of Allah, and the authentic Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Messenger of Islam. And we explained that Allah is Al-Khaliq, Allah is the Creator, and Allah is Al-Hakim, He is the All-Wise. He is Al-Alim, the All-Knowing. So as such, Allah is the one who is more equipped to legislate for the people. And we've mentioned that on a number of occasions. And being that Al-Islam is a religion that all of the sciences and every aspect of this religion is intertwined and interconnected, those truths hold true here today as it relates to the masadir of at-tashri', or as it relates to the legislative bodies in the religion of Al-Islam, those sources from which we draw from the halal and the haram, the permissible and the impermissible in the religion. Likewise, Prophet Muhammad, being the representative of Allah, as all of the prophets and the messengers were prior to him, when they came to their people, they were the ones who explained to the people what Allah had revealed, what Allah wanted in His revelation. So we cannot take the Quran and any individual opens up the Quran and according to his own desires or his own understanding with his human deficiencies and frailties, he comes and he says, based upon his own desires, this is permissible and this is not permissible based upon what I understand from the Quran. This is not what the religion of Islam is all about. Instead, Allah is the lawgiver, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Messenger of Islam, Muhammad, is the one who explains that law, and it's up to us, the Muslims, the human beings, to follow the law and the legislation of Allah. With that being said, as a form of an introduction, the very first masdar or source of legislation in Islam is the Quran itself. The Quran, as we mentioned, is the speech of Allah, the kalam of Allah. It is the actual guidance that Allah revealed to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. May the peace and blessings of Allah forever be upon him. Allah revealed this book to him, and in its revelation, it has sought to take the people out of the depths of darkness into the light of guidance, to take them away from superstition, to take them away from those things as it relates to making their lives difficult. And the laws and the legislation of Al-Islam, it seeks to make things easy for the people. As Allah has mentioned in so many ayahs of the Quran, Allah wants to make things easy for you. Allah has not made anything difficult for you in your religion. So those are some of the characteristics that we find when we look at how Allah in the Quran has made certain things permissible and He has made other things impermissible. And we're going to deal, inshallah, Allah willing, in a future episode with some of the characteristics of how Al-Islam has legislated, some points that we need to know when we look at the halal and the haram, those things that are permissible and those things that are not permissible. When we take a look at them, we'll see that they have certain characteristics that, again, show and prove that Allah is the creator, and that in His creation, He has put in the creation, mercy upon them, and He has also made things easy for them. So, the Quran is the first source of legislation. And what does that mean? Simply put, that means whatever the Quran says is permissible, then that thing has to be looked at and accepted as being permissible. And whatever the Quran has ordered and commanded us to refrain from and to leave alone and to stay away from, and it's made it impermissible or haram, then the Muslim has to take it as being impermissible and it is haram. And also, in addition to that, the Quran is the source in which the Muslim is to judge all of his issues and all of his affairs, whether it's dealing with the legislation of the halal and the haram, the permissible and the impermissible, as well as any other political system. We're going to deal with that as well at a later time, insha'Allah ta'ala. So the first one, the first source of legislation is the Book of Allah, the Quran. And the wisdom behind that is that Allah is the creator, that Allah is the all-knower. As a result of that, He is most qualified to take this position. He's the one who's most qualified. He sees everything, He knows everything. He's the one who knows what will be in the best interest of mankind, and He knows what will be harmful to them. Whereas if you were to take the most intelligent person or the most intelligent group of people and you brought them together in a single room and you told them to legislate, you're going to find that even though, given all of the intelligence that they do not have the ability to come up with legislative laws that are going to be inclusive and making things easy for all of the people. And we see that in the man-made legislations of democracy, socialism, dictatorships, and other than that. So the Quran is the first masdar, or the first source. The second source is the Quran of the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the authentic Sunnah of Muhammad, the messenger and the prophet of Al-Islam. May Allah have mercy upon him. Allah told Rasulullah in the Quran, "Verily we revealed upon you, O Muhammad, the Quran, so that you will explain to the people what was revealed to them." Allah mentioned in another ayah, whatever the messenger gives you, take it. And whatever he prohibits you from, leave it alone. So these are two ayats from the Quran, two verses from the Quran that clearly show and illustrate that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the one who is going to take the Quran and explain what the Quran is saying, and he did that with his authentic sunnah. So the sunnah is the second source of legislation. I would like to make mention in terms of the Quran and the sunnah. Many times you may read or you may hear that some people will put more emphasis on the Quran and less emphasis on the Sunnah. And they may say the Quran is the first masdar or the first source, and the Sunnah is the second masdar or the second source. But in actuality, what is most correct is that we keep both of them together and we do not divide them. As the Prophet told us sallallahu alaihi wasallam about the Quran and the Sunnah, لَنْ يَرَدَ عَنِّي حَتَّى تَرَدُ الْحَوْضِ. You will find that the Quran and the Sunnah will not be split until the people come to the fountain Yawm al-Qiyamah. So the Quran and the Sunnah has to be kept together. Rasulullah was given the Quran, and he was also given the Sunnah by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Sunnah is also revelation, but it is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam who is actually articulating the Sunnah, whereas the Quran is the speech of Allah. So we do not make the distinction of the Quran is first and the Sunnah is second. If you were to leave one man and you gave him all of the Quran, and another man and you gave him all of the authentic Sunnah, this man, he only has the Quran in its totality. He memorized it, he understood it, and he understood it perfectly well. The other man was given the authentic Sunnah from the beginning to the end, from the A of the Sunnah to the Z of the Sunnah, from the beginning to the end. And you were to request from both of them, practice Al-Islam. You will find that this man will be in a better position to practice the religion of Al-Islam, because the Sunnah is what explains the Quran, and the Quran doesn't explain the Sunnah. So that goes to show what? The point is that we're trying to make here is the Quran and the Sunnah, they are together. But for the sake of explanation, we're mentioning the Quran as the first source of legislation, and then the Sunnah is the second source of legislation. So Allah in the Quran has ordered us in a number of ayat, in a number of verses, in a number of chapters to perform the prayer that the Muslims have to pray 5 times a day. But it was the authentic Sunnah that came to us and explained to us the times of prayer, the prerequisites of the prayer, the actual movements of the prayer, what should be said in the prayer, what shouldn't be said in the prayer, what can be done in the prayer, and what can't be done in the prayer. Without the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this would not be possible. So those are the two main and basic mastars or sources of legislation in the Quran. Amongst the Muslim nation, past and present, there's no difference of opinion about these two sources. And it's not befitting or acceptable for there to be any difference of opinion concerning these 2 points. If someone comes and he says, I only am going to take the Quran and I'm not going to take the Sunnah, then he has fallen into a grave error and a grave sin. And it may even expel him from the ranks of the Muslims. It puts him outside of the realm of Islam. Likewise, the person who comes and says, I love the Sunnah, and I want to be a scholar of the Sunnah and a practitioner of the Sunnah. So I'm only going to take the Sunnah since it explains the Quran and I'll do away with the Quran. This individual has also gone outside of the realm of Islam with that particular concept if he knows what he's saying and he knows what he's doing. So we take the Quran and the Sunnah and we take them together. Those are the two sources that are not permissible for anyone who claims to be a Muslim to say, I'm only going to take one and I won't take the other. And there's an authentic hadith that prohibits that. Prophet told us, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, let not any of you recline comfortably on his couch and something comes to him from what I commanded him to do or I prohibited him from doing, and he says, whatever I find in the Quran, I'll accept and I'll take. Whatever is not in the Quran, I won't accept and I won't take. This is something that is not acceptable in the religion of Islam. And I'm sad to say that there are some people who claim to be Muslims. They call themselves the Quraniyun. The Quraniyun, the people of the Quran, they make this claim. And in actuality, what they only succeed in doing is, they succeed in, with that claim, not knowing how to pray, not knowing how to welcome the newborn child, not knowing how to fast properly in the month of Ramadan, and other issues that have been detailed for us in the authentic Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we'll be back after we take this break, inshallah, in order to complete this most important topic. Looking forward to seeing you when we get back, inshallah.
Islam 101.
Back to the Prophet. Join Sheikh Ammar in the program Back to the Prophet, wherein he teaches us practical lessons from the Prophet's life and how this can help us to overcome our challenges in the present.
We talk about the life example of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, seeking guidance for ourselves. In the early days after the revelation of the Holy Quran, the Muslims were greatly persecuted, so much so that quite a few Muslims had to leave Arabia and migrate to Africa to live among Ahl Kitab, Christian people who followed the gospel of Christ.
Islam 101.
Welcome back to Islam 101, where we're discussing and explaining the masadir of al-tashri', the sources of legislation in the religion of Islam. And we mentioned already that the two main sources of legislation are the Quran, the Book of Allah, as well as the Sunnah, the authentic Sunnah of Muhammad, the messenger and the prophet of Islam. May the peace and blessings of Allah forever be upon him. Before going to the next two sources of legislation, maybe some of our panel members would like to open up the door of discussion with a few of their questions. Anyone wants that?
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has described to us in Holy Quran that the memorization of the Quran is made easy for us. So why are we in need of the Sunnah?
Concerning the question of how is it that Allah has mentioned in the Quran that He has made the Quran easy? So is there not a person who will reflect a muddakir? The Quran has been made easy. So why is it that we need any other body of legislation or source of legislation? Why is that? This is the case. The Quran is a book that was revealed by Allah to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Prophet Muhammad was illiterate, and the environment that he was sent to was for the most part a group of people who were illiterate. So therefore, it would not be from justice, nor would it be from wisdom for Allah to send a book that was complicated. So from the description of the Quran, I don't want to say from the nature of the Quran, because the Quran is the speech of Allah. So from the description of the Quran is that Allah has revealed a book and His speech is easy to understand for people who are illiterate, not to mention people who are higher than them in their understanding and educated people. So the Quran has been made easy to understand. And as we mentioned yesterday, Allah said about the Quran, Allah is the one who revealed the Quran, and in it are ayat that are muhkamat. They are clear, they're easy to understand. Qul huwallahu ahad. Say Allah is one. Inna ad-deen indallahi al-Islam. The religion to Allah is one. It is not open for multiple and different interpretations. But the fact still remains that this is the speech of Allah, and it is not permissible for any and everyone to be given the right to come in and to take from the Quran whatever he wants to take and to form his own opinion concerning it. There must be the person who will be considered to be the focus, who will be the main one who's going to explain the Quran to us. And that individual is the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. None of us took the Quran directly from Allah. None of the people were actually present when the Quran was revealed. Allah's Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the one who the Quran was revealed to, and the circumstances surrounding its revelation had to do with him and those people who were with him. So the Prophet Gabriel, he was the one who brought the Quran down to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he was the one who explained to Rasulullah the meaning of this ayat and the meaning of that ayat and what this was intended to do, and so forth and so on. Jibril is not going to come to anyone from amongst us to safeguard us from having a faulty interpretation or understanding. And that's what happened to some of the companions in certain circumstances. Someone would take the Quran and they would understand it a particular way. For an example, Abdullah ibn Abbas. He was the habr of the ummah, scholar of this religion. He used to sit in the majlis or in the company of Umar, who was the leader of the Muslims, and he was quite young. And there were elder men who used to sit also as the consultants of Umar. Some of the elder men took exception to the fact that Abdullah ibn Abbas was there and he was such a young boy, and they also had young children his age. So they wanted to know, yeah, Umar, why is it that he is here and our young children are not here? He said, because he is qualified to be here, whereas your children are not. I'll give you an example. And he asked them, Umar asked those older people, the elder members from the community, what is the meaning of the verse that Allah revealed? If the victory comes, if the help of Allah comes in the victory, and you see the people enter into the religion in droves, what does it mean? This man gave his interpretation of that ayat. He gave his interpretation of the ayat. The next one gave his interpretation of the ayat. He said to Abdullah ibn Abbas, what about you, Abdullah ibn Abbas? What do you have to say? Abdullah ibn Abbas said, that ayat was revealed by Allah, and it was informing Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that his imminent death was approaching. Umar said, I know nothing other than what he's saying. This is what I know concerning the understanding of this ayat. How did Umar know that? Because Rasulullah told him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who was in turn told and informed by Jibril, Ya Muhammad, your death is close. And he brought that ayat. So evidently, Rasulullah also shared that information with Abdullah ibn Abbas. So we have the companions who were the best of the people, the most educated in terms of the religion, the most knowledgeable of the religion, the most knowledgeable of the Arabic language. And yet, they had a misunderstanding about this ayat until someone explained the real meaning of it to them, someone who was exposed to the sunnah. So the Quran is easy, and it was revealed for people to understand. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand the Quran, unlike some of the other so-called religious books, like the Bible. The Bible is a very difficult book to understand. And it's open for the interpretation of any preacher who gets up on Sunday. One preacher is preaching one message, he's preaching another message, and anyone can take the liberty of giving his interpretation of that book because it's hard to understand. It's hard to understand. And the Quran is not like that. Nick?
Yeah, I still don't understand. Why do Muslims use sunnahs as a complement for Quran? Is it incomplete or what?
No, the Quran is complete. Al-yawma akmaltu lakum deenakum. Allah has told Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and told the Muslims, today I have completed for you your religion. The Quran is complete. From the beginning of the first ayat that was revealed until the very last ayat that was revealed, all of the Quran is complete. But as we mentioned, even though the Quran is complete, the Sunnah explains the Quran and it supplements the Quran. I'm a married man and I am Abu Usamah and I'm complete. There's no other Abu Usamah or a portion or a part of me somewhere else that I have to find it or is going to come to me at a later time. No. But yet my wife, as a woman, she completes me and she makes me a total package. This is how the Quran is. And we don't want to give that example in trying to make the tamthil of the Quran or the example of the Quran to something else. It's the concept of being complete and incomplete. I am who I am, a complete person. But my wife comes and she completes me. She adds certain aspects of who I am to make me a complete person. The Quran is complete, but the Sunnah doesn't come in order to complete the Quran. The Sunnah comes in order to explain the Quran and to expound upon the Quran. The Sunnah is mubayyina to the Quran. It is that thing that explains it in detail. It takes the general things that were mentioned, what is known as the mujmal, and the things that are amma, those general rulings and comments that were made in the Quran, and it defines them and it explains those ayat in those verses.
According to Islam, the drinking of wine is not permissible. I've read 2 ayats in the Quran. Please correct if I'm wrong. The one ayat, Allah says the drinking of wine is permissible. Another ayat, it says it's not permissible. Can Sheikh please more clear it on that?
Concerning the Quran and how the Quran mentioned the issue of the impermissibility of intaking intoxicants. In the beginning of Al-Islam, the Arabs in that particular culture, they were given to drinking intoxicants. It was a part of their culture. It was a part of who they were as a people. And this goes to show the point that we were making at the beginning of this episode, that Allah, in legislating, He is the most wise. He knows what the people need, and He knows in what dosages they need as it relates to the legislation. So at the beginning, Allah allowed them to continue to drink because it was something that was a part of their culture. If the ruling came down right away and it prohibited them from drinking, you may have had people who were not ready. And as a result of that they weren't ready to give up drinking and to discard the filthy habit of drinking. Some of them may have even been alcoholics even. If the ruling came down at one time, don't drink anymore, then it would have been as our mother Aisha said. She said, had Allah revealed and one time the impermissibility of drinking khamr or intoxicants, verily many of the Arabs would have left the religion. So it came with a tadarruj, in stages. So at the beginning, it told them that in drinking it is a harm. And it has some benefit and some harm in it, but the benefit outweighs the harm. And then the next ayah came saying that it is evil. Don't drink when you come to the salat. You can drink, but when it's time for prayer, you can't drink. And then finally the ayats were revealed that said you can't drink at all. So this is part of a science of the Quran called the nasikh and the mansukh, something that is abrogated and what abrogates it. And the wisdom from it is Allah having mercy upon the community, Allah taking into consideration, or Allah knowing what the people need, and as a result of that, He legislates according to their needs. Any more questions? Now we move on to the third source of legislation in Islam, which is the ijma', or the consensus of the Muslim scholars. The consensus of the Muslim scholars, especially the consensus of the companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because they were the most knowledgeable of the ummah, of the nation of Islam. In an authentic hadith, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, لا تجتمع أمتي على الضلالة. My ummah will not agree upon something that is wrong. You will find that there are certain Muslims who will try to make permissible what Allah has made impermissible. But you will never find that the whole Muslim nation will come together to agree on such an issue. There are certain people who try to say drinking intoxicants is permissible. Certain Muslims will try to say that usury or riba is permissible. But you will never find that the scholars of Islam, all of them will say such a thing, nor will you find all of the Muslims making such a claim. There may be a few people, a minority of people who say that, but the majority of the Muslims will never ever say such a thing, nor would the whole ummah agree to such a thing. Abdullah ibn Abbas, that tremendous companion of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet and Messenger of Islam, Abdullah ibn Abbas was from those people who remained close to the Prophet throughout his prophethood. He said in describing the position of the companions as it relates to legislation, as it relates to this issue of the consensus of the companions and the consensus of the scholars. He said, whatever the companions see as being good, then it is good. And whatever the companions see as being impure or not good, then it is impure and it is not good. And that is an indication and a proof that the companions, their position on a particular issue and their consensus is a dalil or a proof in the religion. Due to the time restraints, unfortunately, we're going to have to bring this episode to an end. In our next and upcoming episode, inshallah, we're going to continue this particular issue, and we ask Allah to protect us and to protect you. هذا وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا الأمين.
Islam. Islam. Islam.